And hello everybody, and welcome to this webinar on NimbuSCAN. My name's Blair Valentine, and I apologise, I don't actually look like this picture that's shown on this presentation. But I just want to point out, just in regards, if you are watching this, that holding a laptop this way is perhaps not a preferred way of holding a laptop. So that's just a wee warning on that. So getting into the webinar, let me just start this up. Okay, so great. So what we want to talk about today is NimbuSCAN. What is NimbuSCAN? NimbuSCAN is a convenient and paperless methodology for bringing in your accounts payable. So your creditor invoices, bringing them into your system and going through a workflow which can be efficient and save you a lot of time and make this process far more accurate in your system. So we've got supplier invoices are emailed directly into the system, and we go through a process where there's a costing process where you can then validate what the costings and make sure they are correct before you actually send them out to approval to different people within your organization. So different people in your organization can be sometimes time consuming to track down, so we've automated that process. So why is it quick? It's quick because we use optical character recognition to automate the data entry. So it's accurate and it's quick and it's right there on the screen for you, and it saves you time with every aspect of this, and it keeps you organized. You never lose track of an invoice. You quickly see the status of all your invoices at a glance, and the automated workflow keeps your payables flowing. Now, this webinar is a carrying on from a previous webinar that Wayne's done from probably almost a year ago now. So there is a webinar that's out there on our website, on our YouTube, on YouTube as well. So if you're not aware of it, on YouTube we have Nimbus software, and there's a whole lot of range of previous webinars that are available there for you to have a look at. And it almost looks at the top there too that we've got Jason Momoa as a guest star, just to pose for the top of our YouTube channel. Okay, so what did we do in our last webinar? So Wayne talked you through, and I recommend this is not an entire webinar on NimbuSCAN from the beginning to the end. We're going to focus on some specific parts. But what Wayne did show in the previous webinar that I thoroughly recommend that you look at is how it scans in your supplier invoices and how that process works, how it submits through to a workflow and the cost allocation review at that point in time. We're taking this a little bit step further, and I'll follow up with that shortly by telling what the next steps are. And it forwards to the correct person to approve, and it allows for posting once approved with proactive checks. So today we're adding on some more things from that previous webinar, and we're going to show you how it scans your individual supplier invoice lines, how we have a process where it can match against existing purchase order lines, how we can consolidate existing purchase order lines to make that process easier, how we can even create a new purchase order if this creditor invoice does not relate to one, but it is valid in your system, so we can automate and create that automatically. Talking a little bit about how we've got some improved approver workflow, and even the approvers, if they have permission to this, can actually update some of this cost allocation process. So if we're not sure at the administration end, we can ask them some questions, and they may, if we give them permissions and that's something that they want them to do, they can do some extra work around that. We're catering also for showing you how we can cater for creditor branches, and we're catering at the end. We're going to talk about see what questions that you have and what answers as well. So, okay, let me get into this and start the demonstration. So within Nimbus, open this up. If you have NimbuSCAN, there will be another menu that exists in your system called NimbuSCAN, and we come to the dashboard. Within the dashboard, I'm going to look and focus at the moment on the unsubmitted invoices. So these have come into the system, they've scanned, they're sitting in here waiting for me to do something with them. So if I open up my unsubmitted invoices and I click on one of my items, number 73, and I make that a lot larger so we can see it. So what I can see at a glance there is I can see exactly what my creditor invoice looks like as it's come into the system. I can see here on the right hand side that it's already got some defaulted information. So just to explain about this is a creditor invoice from Repco, and it actually exists on 3 pages. So you can see down the bottom here, it says 1 of 3 pages. At the top here on the screen, it actually will say on the ID that there is 1 of 3 pages that for us to be aware of, and we can scroll through each page backwards and forwards to see this in the system. So if I just go to the last page, we see here now that we've got an invoice total, and if I click on that invoice total 1205.36, you can see where it's actually getting it from where it's read it from on the creditor invoice as well, where some of those details are coming from. So that's great. So the overall value is $1,205.36 with a proportion of $157.25 in GST. So if I click on now about cost allocation, so what cost allocation is about, going back and looking at what purchase order this relates to and what are the and reconciling those transactions. So right now it knows that it's read that the purchase order up here is 7822, so it's already filled that in and it knows where to find that information from. If I click on show cost allocation at the bottom of the screen here, which any part of this I can drag up higher if there's more lines that I need to see, or move it around so I can get some better visibility for it. It's already loaded through what is on my purchase order. So this is just a purchase order where someone out in the field's gone out and placed an order at Repco. They've given them a purchase order number and they've come back and said, hey, look, I've placed an order. It's about $1,000 that this was for. Been keyed in the system. We're expecting it to arrive. And it's come back and there's a difference in the price. So what we have here, and it highlights that. So it says here that does not match the goods total at this point in time. So I could actually, if all I wanted to do is go, okay, here's my purchase order line, just get the match along this, and I'm not caring about the individual details. So it already knows the job number as well. So the job number 1150, it's realized that because that's assigned to the purchase order number. Oh, and just to explain one other thing here, in the purchase order, we've got a non-stock code called NBI, which we're just used as a non-stock code brought in, just a generic code just to match things against. So in the case of this, it's been put against NBI, and NBI is a parts code, so it's just sitting there in the system. But I just wanted to mention at this point as well that you can, in Nimbus, against each supplier, you can also with NimbuSCAN choose to, and I'll just bring this up on the screen here just a little bit, you can define against every creditor, if you like, a default stock code. So in the case of my one there that's NBI, you could choose for different creditors that they have their own default stock code if the stock code cannot be matched against your existing stock codes in the system. Or if it's an overhead purchase order, you can also see here that we can default the GL account that it defaults to in the system against the creditor. Just wanted to point that out. Okay, so what do we have here? We have that it's there's a difference in the value. So I'm saying, okay, my expected cost was $1,000, but my actual cost here, instead of being $1,000, was actually $1,048.11. I can choose to overtype this, and then we basically see that it has now matched the actual cost. There's a slight variation in our GST, so 157.22 versus 157.25, but on submitting this creditor invoice, it'll update the GST to match. We take the rule of on the creditor's invoice that the GST figure will always be correct. So we take that rule to override that. We can obviously at an individual level override, change the tax codes, etc. if they were non-taxable, etc. to make those visible. So that's one option that I have with this invoice that I could have done there. Another option that I have, I could actually load the invoice line. So over here now, if you've watched Wayne's previous webinar on this load invoice lines is now a new button. If I click on load invoice lines, what it's actually doing now is it's going through and saying, okay, out of this entire invoice at the top here, I'm now loading every single line that's on that. If it exists in the system, you can see here that we do have a stock code that's R2830P that matches. So it will validate and match that against the system. And if that exists in a stock, if it cannot find it, it comes through to that default NBI code that I mentioned before. Now, so in the case of this, I might be choosing now, I'll just click on the slide and I'm actually going to zero the lines. Oops, sorry, zero that line, match that one as complete, load the invoice lines. Just need to make sure that that one there has a, that I'm deleting, sorry, marking that line as complete. So what I do want to do in this case, I could actually choose to mark this line as complete, zero out the actual cost that's against this. So what will happen is that when it goes through to the purchase order or goes through the posting time phase, it will actually count this as being marked as complete on this particular line, but it will then add to the purchase order all these lines that are above it. So automatically I can have that shown as individual items against the creditor invoice, and this now reconciles back to what it was. Oops, if I just tab off of that, so I get my pro that to match, and then that will reconcile back. What happens at this stage is that once you've got the way that you want it to look, you can then submit this, and it will go through to the next scenario. Oh, sorry, it's got a little yellow explanation mark here on the screen. Do you want to split? Sorry, I didn't notice that it popped up with this. Do you want to split this invoice after same? What I wanted to say about this feature is that when you save it, this invoice has 3 pages. Sometimes, depending on what's been emailed to you, you might have had a creditor invoice which was 3 separate creditor invoices all sent at once, and you can actually split that automatically in the system. In the case of this, I'm saying, no, I don't want to split this invoice after saving. It's 3 pages. I want to consider it to be 1 invoice line, so I can go no and submit that. GST variance detected. Yeah, so what do we got? Costed $340, invoice $157.25. I think I've made a little mistake with this example. Down the bottom, what am I doing wrong here? Let me just get rid of that line that's at the bottom. $104.8. I've obviously made a little mistake on this one. Let me just load the invoice lines again. I think I've actually loaded these invoice lines so many times that I've actually tripled all the cost. Okay, this is a great example to show you of what you can do, how you can easily make some mistakes. So I can actually just zero roll the lines, delete the 0 lines, and load the invoice lines again. Okay, to get that to validate, no, and I want to submit, no. Okay, excellent example of what can go wrong and how you can correct that. Next one I want to have a look at is another example of if I open up this one. When we open this one up, we can see that it is all matched. It's $105. That's all good. If I have a look at the existing purchase order that I have in the system, so I click on my show cost allocation, brings that. If I load my order lines, so in my system, so I've loaded already that this is for a jockey wheel, and that I have 2 of them on order, but I can see from what I've got at the top here that actually in the case of this, actually only 1 of them has been supplied. So I can choose in the case of this, I can actually choose to load the invoice lines. So now I'm loading the invoice lines, and actually what I want to do here is I can actually match the 2 of these off, saying, okay, I'm now matching this. So what it's done, it said, okay, from the invoice lines that were received or scanned on this compared to the lines that were on the purchase order, I can see that I had 2 available, but all I've got now is actually 1, and my expected cost is $143, which matches off, my actual cost is $91.30, which matches off what I've got on this purchase order and automatically applies what it's got needs to do against that. So we can match automatically here against existing transactions. If I save and submit this will actually now go away and update the purchase order, and it will put one of those back on back order from previous. So if I just submit this one. And what we've got now, I'll show you another example. In this example, what we have is, now I've been playing with this before, so actually I'll just turn it off because we actually, at the top here, we don't actually have a purchase order for this. So we've got this invoices come in, there's no purchase order that actually exists in the system. So show cost allocation, there's actually no purchase order to map it against. So what I can do in the system is over here beside where the order number is, I can go, okay, I know this is actually a real invoice. This is something that I actually do want to pay. I can now go, okay, I am clicking on, it's a new order. I can then choose what order type I want it to be. So it's not an overhead order. In the case of this, I want it to be a job purchase order, and I can say who's the person that originated this. So this is to help with the approval process. So in the case of this, I'm going to choose it's me in the system. And what I can do now is I can then click on show the cost allocation. And if you notice here on this right hand side, there is actually no button to reload what was already on the purchase order because it doesn't exist. So what we can do here is there's several different options. I can choose to actually just to manually add a line and to type in and go, okay, it's a shackle and there's 3 of them and the overall price is $36.51. I can choose to do varying ways of doing this. I can then choose to actually load the invoice lines. So this loads the invoice lines that are occurring on this invoice that's been scanned in. This doesn't exist as a purchase order or anything in the system at this point in time. And I can go, okay, I'm happy that there are 3 of these. It doesn't actually have a job number against it, so I can actually enter what the job number should be. So I could look up a job number and put a job number against it, etc., in the system. I could turn around and go, okay, in the case of this, wants me to have a job number. Let me just choose one. And let me, in the case of this, I could then choose to say, actually, well, in this particular creditor invoice, maybe instead of actually having 3 individual lines of $1 each, I could perhaps consolidate and say, in case of this, I'm going to have 3, and then I'm going to choose these other lines and actually just delete the lines. So we have a real lot of flexibility how we can actually add information, or we can match lines off, or we can change the information a little bit to really quickly and easily just to check and to validate this information. So over here, what's it saying? The cost allocation does not match the goods total. So what have we got? 36.51, maybe just because I haven't tabbed off it. If I just save it. And then once there are, oops. Okay, to make sure that it is, delete that line, 36.51. It's now just complaining about the GST, so I can go through and do that process. So once this happens, it goes to the next stage. So once it's actually been submitted, it goes to the next stage where it's going to go to an approver. So I just wanted to show you some examples around that. So from an approver perspective in the system, what can happen is that it can email the approver directly. So it will email them saying, hey, in the system, you're marked as the approver for this invoice or this job or this supplier. And that can be, we've got, let's just click on this so we can actually see what I'm talking about. So we can have a whole lot of different rules that are set up against particular situations. So if I just open up one as an example, so saying in the example of this, set up if it's an overhead type job, and that if they have an approval limit of $100,000, that it's going to go to a user of Michelle, and that she's the person that can approve that. We've got a lot of different ranges or steps, so different configurations of depending on whether it's what job it is, or depending on what the supplier it is. You can put all sorts of conditions around who actually is the person to approve that. We can have multiple approvers, so it can go through a primary approver, and then it goes through to a secondary approver to go through multiple steps to do that. We've also got in here in the system, we've got what we term as approval proxies. So what this means is if the approver is away for a period of time, that you can stipulate and say, in the case of, if I just show you, in the case of this, for Michelle, between this period of time, I'm going to then substitute, instead of being Michelle, that it goes like sort of to myself as an example. So we can also put proxies in there to substitute when someone may be away on leave or unavailable to do this. So as I mentioned before, the approver will get a email come through to them, and on the email it basically has actually, why don't I just show you a picture of this instead of me talking to it. We've got a fantastic manual that details some of this information. So what happens is that they will get an email that comes through. Let me just pull this up. And when an email comes through, it says an invoice has been submitted for your approval. And down the bottom, it actually mentions that you can reply with the first word of approve, or you can apply with reject. So via email, you can the first word that you type in, either approve or reject, will automatically approve or reject the invoice in the system. Otherwise, there is a approval queue. So if I was to pretend that here's a list of invoices in the system that are waiting for approvals in the system, you as a user can come into your approval queue and have a look at these. Just click on them to open it up. And what this gives you is the same sort of look and feel that we had before. It shows you the fact that there is in regards to this, there is a option on the left-hand side here where you can click and go at a glance, approve, 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 or reject. You can put some comments in there as to why you're approving, or sorry, why you might be choosing to reject that. And as I mentioned before, if the approver has the permissions, they actually can have access to editing this grid. So if you had, say, a creditor invoice came in and there was it had 5 lines, but the 6th line you weren't 100% sure on, you could send this through to the approver and they can look at what the 6th line is to actually then say, okay, this is actually correct or this isn't correct, and send it backwards and forwards. Also, just if you hadn't within this from Wayne's first email, you can see that there's also lots of there's buttons at every stage for making where you could email somebody directly for a comment or something like that. And even within the document itself, you can add some sort of annotation or some sort of comment. So you could actually go along and actually type in here, you know, Blair's comment or something like that. So you could actually, the person could see that they've raised some sort of comment directly in the system. That happens there. Okay, great. Another point that I wanted to just to touch on is also in regards to how it actually brings in or it recognizes this information. So within Nimbus, we have a creditor set up that's called Repco, and if I just click on here on our creditors, NimbuSCAN creditor list, within that, so we have some criteria. So it looks and says, okay, here's the creditor name, and it tries to look and says, can it see on the scanned invoice there's a street address or a city address, that sort of information that it actually goes and says, okay, I can match this off. So what we also have now is that in the case of where your supplier has multiple branches where they might have brought something from, this address may not be able to be matched. So we have in creditor branches, we can then add into here additional branches with different street addresses or information of where it might be coming from, so it can match against what is either an existing creditor number in your system, or it might be you might have multiple creditors for different branches to do with a supplier. So that's available in our system now with that as well. So hopefully from what you've seen so far, you could see that how easily it is that the system can scan in an invoice, it can recognize it, it can bring it up on the screen, match it against an existing purchase order that you've got. You can match those lines, you can add additional lines if they don't exist. If the purchase order doesn't exist, you can actually get it to automatically create a new purchase order. The system's very accurate, but I just also want to say that it's not always, there can be cases where it's not 100% accurate. It does its best to scan the information from an invoice, but it has a training functionality in which you can say, hey, this field relates to this field, this is where it now comes from, it'll pick it up for next time. So we just like to highlight that as part of this process as well. So at this point, I just want to perhaps be able to open this up to see if there are any sort of comments or questions, or if we've raised any sort of people are interested on asking something that we've just seen.
Well, Blair, I think you've done a fantastic job, because no one seems to have any questions. They're either thinking of them and wondering how this product's going to help them a lot, or they're going to maybe come through in a little bit. Oh, we've got one. Angela's asked can approval processes be batched?
Can approval processes be batched, as in like, so if so you've got the example there where I talked about with approvals where there could be an email that comes through, so you can go approve and reject to an email, but you've also got that screen that I just that I showed you before, where from an approval perspective, let me just go back to that and bring that up. Approvals queues. So you've got this screen that's showing here that's got a list of all the things that are wanting to be approved for the individual. So it's a matter of just going through and actually going approve. And I'm just wondering, perhaps is the question, can I just do these in bulk? Can I just look at this and go, I want to approve those 4 invoices maybe?
Yes, I think Angela's just trying to prevent there being loads of emails sent through. So instead of someone receiving 100 emails all at once, they can, I mean, I suppose there's different functions you could do. Is you could have automatic emails going to a separate folder in your mailbox or something, Angela, but then,
that's right. So it's perfectly, the system's perfectly configurable, and we can sort of make that and match those rules as to how they want it to be. So like some people might just want an email knowing that they've actually got approvals, and they basically look at their approval queue and manage it that way, rather than actually having all these emails that come through that they could put in approval or not approve. It all depends, I guess you're right, Angela, on your organization, the volume of invoices that comes through, what sort of time that the approvers have to actually to do this, right? We don't want we don't want the system to constantly be barraging them with emails about new invoices, hour after hour. So absolutely, we can set that up to the way that it works for your business.
She says that sounds great. Good. We'll come. Yep, someone's wondering about costs. If anyone is wondering about costs, then definitely just get in contact with Daryl. Daryl Woodward, he'll be able to help you out. And if you have any other questions, then just follow them through to us and we'll be able to answer them for you. I think it's quite timely considering that it's coming up to the end of the month and everyone's probably starting to process their creditor invoices, or will be next week. And it'll be interesting for you just to time how long it does take you to do it and see how much of a time saver this could possibly be for some of your staff that have to do this job every month.
And we've had great examples coming through from existing companies that are using NimbuSCAN about the amount of time that it's saving them. It's just incredible what this process can be, about how time consuming it can be when you get all these creditor invoices through, finding the person who needs to approve them, bits of paper that are going around, all that sort of thing can take so much time at the end of the month. And this is just basically makes that so much quicker and so much more efficient. Pays for itself quite quickly.
Definitely does. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And again, thank you, Blair, for stepping us through this. This will be made available so you can go back and have a look at it, because we know that there's a lot of information to take in. And as Blair said, don't forget to watch the original NimbuSCAN webinar, because that will show you the process in the beginning, because you might be wondering how it all works from the beginning and not want to lose that. But if you have any questions, let us know. Anything to do with costs and stuff, get in touch with Daryl, and we'll look forward to sending you out an email about our next webinar. So thank you, everyone.